Despite much of the attention of the gaming press being fixated on the GTX 1080 Ti's of the world, the vast majority of gamers are still on 1080p screens. This is either budgetary reasons or due to hooking up a small form factor PC to a larger living room television if they've been waiting on a better catalogue of large screen gaming focused 4K televisions to be available at a decent price. Enter the GeForce GTX 1050 Ti graphics card, which is based upon Nvidia's Pascal GP107 core and touted to be capable of playing through swathes of titles at 1080p. As full disclosure, this product was sent to us by Galax for review, but this is not a sponsored video, thus all opinions are our own. The Exox White features 768 CUDA cores, just like other GP107s, but with a base clock of 1354 MHz, some 60 MHz over the reference design, and boosts up to 1468 MHz compared to just 1392 of the reference. As usual, with a 1050 Ti, you'll find 4GB of GDDR5 memory and 112GB of bandwidth thanks to a 128-bit bus. This jump of Pascal to 4GB over Maxwell's entry-level models is definitely appreciated, and with game graphics demanding ever larger chunks of memory, it's comforting to know the additional RAM is in place. The RAM, speaking of it, is also clocked at virtually identical speeds to reference GTX 1050 Ti designs, with the RAM operating at 7008 MHz as opposed to just 7000 of reference. The Galax GTX 1050 Ti features quite nice aesthetics, separating it from other products, with noticeable customizations. The first and perhaps most striking is the pleasing white PCB cooler, which does look rather nice in an LED/windowed case. There are two 80mm fans which feature a almost whisper quiet operation, we'll get to that in a second, along with a cooler featuring copper heat pipes which helps keep heat down. If you're familiar with other 1050 Ti cards, then you'll probably notice the additional 6-pin power connector, and it might cause you to raise an eyebrow, and its purpose is likely to keep the card stable during overclocking. For those wondering, the power distribution is taken care of thanks to a 3+1 phase design. The only gripe we have with the cooler is the shroud doesn't quite reach the end of the card, possibly allowing some of the warmer air to escape back into the case. It's likely not a big deal, as such cooling solution is more than sufficient for a GP107, but it is something to bear in mind. Fortunately, the dual fans do operate virtually silently during regular gaming, unless you decide to crank the fans manually to over say 80% threshold. At 40 to 60%, which is usually what you're going to hit with fans on auto, especially with game audio, you're not going to be able to hear the card in operation with a closed off case, and during desktop watching movies and so on, this is not even going to be a slight cause for concern. Oh, and one last thing, there is no coil wind from our particular card, which is definitely a good thing. For those wishing to operate in a multi-desktop environment, the card supports 3 monitors and dual-link DVI-D connectors, along with a DisplayPort 1.4 and HDMI 2.0b. It's nice Galax included a secondary DVI-D connector, as quite the number of 1050 Ti cards only ship with a single one. For the test system, we use a 7600K running at 4.5 GHz, 16GB of Ballistic Elite DDR4 memory running at 3000 MHz, and finally an MSI Z270 Pro Carbon motherboard, along with of course Windows 10 and the latest version of games. We'll be testing out game performance at the resolution of just 1080p, as we feel that's the appropriate target market for this card. Older titles, or less demanding titles such as Overwatch, can be nudged to 1440p, but for the latest games such as Rise of the Tomb Raider, 1080p represents the best choice. It frees up precious rendering time to improve the quality of pixels and still maintain nice stable frame rates. We'd advise gamers who insist on 1440p to opt for at the very least a GTX 1060, or possibly an RX 570 or better still a 580. Obviously this does depend upon your budget. Right off the bat, Witcher 3 at ultra settings at 1080p runs great, averaging 40 FPS during the early parts of the game as we ride through villages and thick forests. Capcom's Resident Evil 7 is just shy of reaching 60 FPS with the highest in-game settings at 1080p. The card manages 55 frames per second on average. This trend continues, rather nicely might I add, with Rise of the Tomb Raider at Ultra and 1080p 45 frames a second, and yet another Square Enix title, Hitman, 51 FPS. We do see frame rate spikes during less demanding games such as Overwatch, where Ultra hits 100 FPS plus, demonstrating that Blizzard's artistic approach to visuals and design helped keep the game running at 60 FPS and look great in even the most modest of hardware. What we have here is clearly a card which ticks all the right boxes, a card which is perfect for 1080p gaming, providing you're willing to make the concessions to the frame rates or graphical settings depending. Make no mistake, if you're willing to plonk down extra dosh, then a more powerful card can be grabbed, and a reference design GTX 1060 3GB costs around $200 US, which is, depending where you're shopping, around 50 to 70 more than what Galaxy is asking for the GTX 1050 Ti Exoc White. For those on a stricter budget, this is definitely a solid performer, and it also has another market, small form factor, possibly LAN gaming rig, or even media streaming PC, which perhaps would see light gaming usage as you're hooking up to a living room television. In these scenarios, this card is an excellent purchase. It's whisper quiet, runs cool, and pumps out good frame rates. We have no qualms recommending Galaxy 1050 Ti, as it's a great card, and given it's about on par with the price of reference models line, it makes a lot of sense to opt for a model which features higher clocks. For those on a tight budget and wishing more performance, your only real option, for now at least, is to jump onto the used market and pick up, say, an Nvidia GTX 970 or R9 290 from AMD. The used market isn't without flaws and kind of falls outside the remit of this video to discuss, but if you are looking for a new card, the GTX 1050 Ti Exoc White is a perfect compromise between price and performance. With all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Take care of yourselves, and bye for now.